I'm delighted and pleased, and now on mic, to welcome you to Passport to Practice, Decoding Credentialing in Physical Therapy. In this session, representatives from the Foreign Credentialing Commission on Physical Therapy will decode the credentialing process used for non-CAPTE graduates. The speakers for this session are Betsy Becker, Julia Funaki, and Jamie Nolan. Betsy Becker and Julia Funaki currently serve on FCCPT's Board of Directors. Jamie Nolan is the current Managing Director of FCCPT. You can find their bios on the event app. They have valuable information to share, and we also encourage your participation. If you wish to ask a question during the Q&A portion, the members of the Education Committee will provide you with a microphone. Please abide by the ground rules in the program notebook so that more attendees have a chance to ask questions. And please, at the end of the session, you know what I'm going to say, please scan the QR code to complete your evaluation. We really, really value your feedback. Now, I'll turn it over to the speakers.
Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? It's good to see everyone. So by now, I'm sure you're very familiar with Slido. Is that correct? Great, because we're not going to do that. We're going to do it the old-fashioned way. I'm already going to upset a few people because I'm going to ask you just to shout out a few things. So where do you think the foreign educated PTs are coming from? What countries? Philippines, Canada, India, great. Well, we're going to go into the top 5. Some of you are very accurate. And the other question I wanted to ask, what are the top states or jurisdictions do you think that they're going to? And New York, Michigan, Texas, Illinois, California. Was California? All right, we're gonna learn that a little bit later as well. So today our objectives are to describe the credentialing process for the foreign educated physical therapist. And that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna give you a high-level overview of that process. Julia is then going to discuss the rigor of the process from the document collection to the evaluation. And then Betsy's gonna end the session with the placement of the physical therapy coursework. If you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to raise your hand and a mic will be brought to you. We don't necessarily need you to wait until the end. So as you know, acronyms are very popular within FSPPT. So we thought we would start out with a few that you're gonna see throughout this entire presentation. So the CWT is the Coursework Evaluation Tool. You all know the next one, so I'll just skip over that. Hopefully you know the next one too, FCCPT. TOEFL is the test of English as a foreign language. EDGE is the electronic database for global education. This is one of our premier resources for foreign documents. The HEC is the Higher Education Commission. This is in Pakistan. And HEI is just in general Higher Education Institute. So here we have Arwa, who is a Pakistani who was educated as a DPT. And she wants to come to the US and work. And she has no clue what the process is. Because in Pakistan, there is no regulation of physical therapy. You know, when she got that DPT degree, she's able to practice. There's no licensure or registration. So coming to the US is a very confusing process. So, you know, her education again was completed in Pakistan, the DPT, the Doctor in Physical Therapy, and that is the entry-level degree in Pakistan, and she completed it in 2019. And you'll see that's the seal of the university that she went to. So one of the first things I would ask her is, where do you want to work? Because that is going to drive the entire evaluation process, because every state is different. So our top 5 states where we see our applicants going to are Texas, Florida, California, New Jersey, and Illinois. So the audience was pretty accurate. So once she determines, where she wants to work, then her next step is to apply to FCCPT. Once she does that, or this is our online application, she does that all online. She'll go to our website. You'll see over here, sections of our application that she has to fill out. So she'll go through the general information, exam history, licensure history, and then finally her education. That gives us all the information we need in order to make sure that we're collecting the right documents to verify and to evaluate. And this is just an example of the documents that we're collecting: a transcript, a syllabus, a diploma, and oftentimes a TOEFL. I'm not going to spend a lot of time about the transcript, syllabi, and diploma because that's something Julia would talk to you about. The TOEFL, however, is the test of English as a foreign language. It is offered by ETS, and we verify this for 9 jurisdictions. That doesn't mean that only 9 jurisdictions require the TOEFL. It just means that we only verify them for 9 jurisdictions. We also verify TOEFL for USCIS, as this is a requirement for us to be able to issue the healthcare worker certificate for them to immigrate and be able to work here. And the TOEFL, most states or jurisdictions have the same standard, but not all of them do. So that is, again, a very confusing thing for our applicants, is understanding the different requirements of each jurisdiction, especially when a lot of them are coming from a system that's a national system, or they don't have regulation at all. So once we collect the documents and we go through the rigorous process of the verification and authentication, we complete the evaluation. And the evaluation is done on the coursework tool that is verified and validated against the CAPTE criteria by FSBPT. FCCPT does not own the coursework tool. This is a federation document that we are licensed to use. There's also 2 other organizations that are licensed to use the coursework tool. So once we complete the evaluation and RWA is found equivalent, or education is found equivalent, a lot of times that looks like, the evaluation, remediation, because oftentimes the first time through, they're not meeting our DPT standard, whether that's in credits or contents or clinical hours. Many times they have to remediate and go back and take some additional coursework in order to meet the standard of the coursework tool used for the evaluation. So once they get that approval, they go back to the state and they apply for licensure, just like your domestic training. And it is up to the state to authorize that individual to sit for the NPT. And then the process from there is very similar to the domestic training. They then will take the MPTE and hopefully pass the first time and then become licensed. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Julia, who will discuss the documentation.
Thank you, Jamie. Now, our bios are in the app, but I'm going to start this by just telling you a little bit about me. I am the external member on the board, and my background is actually, all my career has been in higher education and in international credential evaluation and international admissions. So that's what I'm bringing to this particular presentation. So when we talk about authentication of documents, it really is something where we want to think about what do we do for our own applicants, for our own students who are coming through. And we want to mirror that for our international applicants coming through so that they meet the same kind of criteria. We're being uniform about this. So one of the ways we do that is by using a systematic approach. And this here is a text-filled slide that you can take back to your desk. It can be a reference. You can keep in the desk drawer to think about how do they go about this again? How do they evaluate these international applicants? And if we think about ARWA, we think about the individual that's coming through this. Think about them as somebody who has a passport to practice. And along the way, they're going to need to get it stamped for different parts of the process, okay? So while this might seem like a really pretty straightforward process to us, what it's important to remember is that we need to do the systematic approach to maintain our due diligence for the applicant and for our profession. So this checklist just asks us questions that we want to go through, and as we get to do this over and over, and we do this for months, years, decades, right? We start to do this as just second nature. But when we're starting out, it's good for us to think about these points as we do it. For instance, the very first question, or the second question, which country? That seems like such a basic question, right? But who's familiar with the University of St. Francis? Anybody ever hear of the University of St. Francis? Yes, where is it? Do you know? Well, there's one in Illinois. There's one in Indiana. There's a Franciscan University of Steubenville in Ohio. There's also St. Francis College in New York. So sometimes what seems obvious might need a little bit more digging on our part. For instance, Trinity University. There's not just one. So the first thing you need to say is, which Trinity University? What country are we located in? Punjab University is in Lahore, Pakistan. But there's also a Punjab University that became Panjab University to differentiate itself that's in India. So these things are important to sort of know. Soochow University. Has anybody heard of Soochow University? Well, there's one in China, and there's also one in Taiwan. So the first question is, where is it located, right? Seems obvious, but sometimes we need to do a little bit more digging and just make sure we're actually looking at what we think we're looking at. The same, just like I said, the same that's in the United States, we need to think about as in our international students. So, as we go down through this checklist, these are some of the things that Jamie and her team would be looking for when they look at the records that they're looking at. What resources do we want to use to evaluate this person? We're going to go through these. Is the institution recognized? How do we go about doing that? So step by step, let's go through and look at what we might do for ARWA. So beginning the evaluation. As we start the process and looking at ARWA's application and thinking about her, we need to pull together what are the tools, in this case, that we need to use, starting with our resources. This first slide here, these are screenshots from the electronic database for global education. Full disclosure, this is an ACRO product. And for those of you, we talk acronyms, right, all the time? ACRO. Anybody know what it stands for where I work? It's the American Association of Collegiate Registrars and Admissions Officers. It's a member organization of about 2,800 colleges and universities in the United States. There's also some from overseas, about 11,000 members, and our role is to serve our members by providing them resources, research, training, and best practices in higher education to do their roles in both the records office and the admissions office. So this is a product that we offer, the Electronic Database for Global Education. It has about 200 and some profiles, over 200 profiles. That's more than there are countries in the world. Well, that's because places like the Faroe Islands have a profile. They may not have a formal higher education system, but we do have a profile on them so that you would know if you were to encounter somebody from the Faroe Islands that they follow the education system of Denmark. The EDGE database is set up in such a way that you get to the, see if I can do this, you get to the front page and the world is divided up by continent. And then you would pull onto the continent you're looking for. And for our world, we're looking in Asia and we're looking at Pakistan. You would pull up Pakistan and it gives you, for every profile, it's set up the same way with an overview, credentials and sample credentials for many of those programs, an education ladder, a grading system, resources, and where applicable, a glossary. So now we've got tools, okay? We're starting to get a background on Pakistan and what we need to be looking for. A note about resources and what Jamie's crew would do in their work. Not all resources are created the same. And what do we mean by that? Well, a couple of things. You need to know where you're getting your information from and if it's a legitimate official place to get that information from. So we break up resources when we think about them into different categories. EDGE is one resource. It's not the only resource, and we certainly wouldn't recommend that it be the only place you ever look for this information. In credential evaluation, then, we try to always go to primary resources first and foremost. That is the source that's directly from the authority, okay? Rather than an interpretation of secondhand or third-hand information. Not that those aren't valuable, because they certainly can be in your work, and we use them regularly. But when we talk about primary source information, for Arwa's case, we're talking about the ministry that would have oversight of that particular institution where she received her education. 9 times out of 10, more than that, that is the Ministry of Education. There are some programs where it might be the Ministry of Health, okay? Or it might even be another ministry, maybe a Ministry of Defense to which a medical training program was offered, okay? So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about the primary source. The institution itself, the academic records that Jamie's team looks at is a primary source document. Secondary sources are things like EDGE that I just showed you, where we're pulling together information from a host of sources and putting it there for your easy perusal. There are lots of other good sources out there for that information, but there's also tertiary sources. Right now, what you're doing right now, this is tertiary source information. You're seeing slides from somebody who presented them from some information that she got is coming from someplace else. Is it valuable? Sure. Is it your first source for authenticating a document? Not necessarily. You want to go directly to the primary source. All right. Now that we have a process, now that we've talked about resources and what level we want to get them through, we need to start thinking about what's next. Well, we need to know about the system that Arwa's coming from. And one of the ways that we do that is we want to focus on that country's educational structure. So FCCPT understands what the structure is here in the United States. Now we need to understand the situation in Pakistan, where Arwa is from. So what you see here is an illustration called an academic ladder that outlines that structure. The ladder is from the EDGE database that I showed you earlier, but there are also many other ladders out there that you could encounter. Other credential evaluation services or ministries. The Netherlands has a lot of ladders that they put out. Canada has some ladders that they issue. But this is a ladder from the US perspective, but talking about exactly what the Pakistani education system is. Over here, I have given you a graph. This graph here is the structure of the US education system. Look familiar? Right? It's also very much like the structure that you will see in that ladder for Pakistan. Pakistan didn't always look so much like the US, but in the last 20 years, it's really evolved its education system. Okay? So you start to think about this, and it starts to put together what kind of credentials are we looking at for Pakistan. The next thing, we know the education structure. We've got some resources at our disposal. We're ready to do our work. We're looking at Arwa's case, and we think we need to know about the institution that she studied in. Where did she go to school? Where did she study? Is it recognized in Pakistan? On that EDGE database and elsewhere under resources, you'll find that one of the resources for Pakistan is the Higher Education Commission. From there, in EDGE or elsewhere, there's a link to the Higher Education Commission. You could probably type into your Google machine, Higher Education Commission in Pakistan, and come up with it as well. But this is a screenshot of that Higher Education Commission. And you'll see right there, nice and easy for you, laid out is welcome to the HEC, and the fourth box to the right is the university information. That's where I want to go, because I want to find out about this university and is it recognized. So we go there and we can type in through a search, and it says there, these are institutions that are accredited institutions, illegal, university ranking, etc. India and Pakistan have no hesitation that I've seen in listing out institutions that they think are illegitimate. Often a fun thing to go on there and look and see. So we're hoping Arwa's institution isn't on there. It's not. So let's type in and see what we get when we type in the name of her institution. Well, she told us that she went to the Dow University of Health Sciences. We type it in, and lo and behold, it comes up. And it comes up as a recognized institution, no issues. We can find out lots more information about it. I don't know if you can see all this, but it includes where it is, the department, the website. So you can go right to the website itself from the Higher Education Commission. You'll see it's hyperlinked there. And a little map of where you would find it as well. You can also see that on there, they have a link to a verification of documentation. So now we know that we can go in and put the registration number into this box and find out from Arwa's documentation, can I verify her document? And that's exactly what FCCPT would do. So you see they've gone through this whole process, step by step, stamp by stamp, and Arwa is looking good. Make sense? All right. Now, let's talk about how we set up the evaluation. I think Jamie mentioned already the Coursework tool, which is here. So this is the form that you're looking at. And now let's think about what we have from Arwa. We haven't seen any records yet, have we, from Arwa? Now we're going to see them. And before I go there, let's just talk about the courses are listed. And what we have here are we list out credit hours and then the transcript reference for this information. So that's what we're going to kind of be looking for Arwa as well as some other information. So once we get here, we see, and these are the same document on either side, the left and the right, the Dow University of Health Sciences, Karachi. This is Arwa's transcript. It's not really Arwa's, but we're going to say that it is. And you'll see that what I'm showing you here is the first semester of the first year of the DPT program. And it lists the course, it lists the credit hours, and it lists the grade. Now, what I want to point out here is that this document, not so clear, hard to read. I've tried to pull out and isolate this box in the upper left, which is here. That is a grading scale that they have put directly on the document to detail to you what's the grading scale that's being used at this institution for this particular program. I mentioned that EDGE has the same tabs in each profile, and one of them is grading. For Pakistan, if you went in there, you would find a few grading scales, but you would also learn that grading is basically can differ from institution to institution, department from department, program from program. Sound familiar? Anybody have that at their institution? You're at an institution? Yeah, right? So we learn that, and that's why this grading scale becomes so important to us, because they're telling you right here and right now that at this time period, this was the scale that they used for this particular program, the DPT. Also, this is lovely that they put it on the front of the document. Is that usually where it is, Jamie? No. No. A lot of times you need to flip the document over or go down a page or two to find that information, or perhaps go into the university website, the catalog, to find that information, okay? But usually it can be found with the right search string. And we encourage that you use it. Now, grading. In the work that I do, and the work that Jamie does, grading is truly one of the most difficult, debated issues that we face, right? It is, we could spend days and workshops on this topic of grading and how to concord grades and grading practices, right? But suffice it to say, in the world of credential evaluation, we like to say, when you're comparing grading systems and education systems, some people would say you're comparing apples and oranges. We would say you're comparing apples and pianos. There's not necessarily any way you're going to find commonality, but what we can tell you is that there are certain types of grading scales out there. This just gives you an idea of some of those types of scales. The percent scale. Oftentimes we find that in the Indian subcontinent, India, but oftentimes it's a much more expanded use of the percent scale. A percent of 60 is an A range, whereas a 35 is passing. Wouldn't be the case here now, would it? Degree classifications. Who's familiar with the British system or British model systems, where you're given a classification of your degree? A first class, a second class upper, second class lower. So there's a lot of different ways of thinking about grading and assessment out there. You know, part of what we say is take it with a grain of salt. Luckily, one of the things that you'll find that is in most countries of the world is that the grade of D doesn't really exist. If you pass a course, you pass it. A C is the minimum passing grade. The idea of a D grade is much more a US-centered idea. My old boss used to say it came from the University of Virginia. I don't know if that's true or if he just said that because he's from Maryland and I'm from Virginia, so. But anyhow, it really isn't as problematic as far as the minimum passing grade goes. There are systems that do have D grades. Jamie and her crew are very well versed in that as well, but I just wanted to spend a moment to talk about how complicated grading can be. Okay. Now, going back to ARWA. Sometimes ARWA's program was fairly recent, so not a big deal. We could go to the resources and we could look at what we needed to see for those resources, right? In those resources, we had current information. We had the internet to get us there and to see things. Sometimes we see older things. And I don't know if you know this, but there's the little thing out there called the Internet Archive. And if ARWA had gone to Dow University of Health Sciences 15 years ago, we could go to the Internet Archive to find out what exactly that program entailed. What was the grading scale possibly? So it's really just screenshots. They go out and they crawl the internet and they crawl the web and they take screenshots. So this particular screenshot of Dow University, I believe, is from April of 2014. This is a fun thing to do for your own, if you're at a college or university, your own institution, to see when did you first have a website? And what did it look like? I did this for our organization, and I think we went back to, I want to say it was the early 2000s, and it was pretty basic, let's just put it that way. So we've evolved a lot as far as the internet goes. Okay, one more point I'd like to make, and then I'm going to sit down and listen to Betsy, is to say, here's a systematic approach once again. I just want to highlight that ARWA has gone through many, many steps. Jamie and her team has done good work with lots of tools to make sure that she meets the same kind of criteria that we're looking for in our domestic applicants. And I leave you not only with this to have at your desk if you're ever interested, but also here's a list of some of the Pakistan resources that we would use. And so you see first and foremost up there are the ministries, the Ministry of Secondary and Tertiary Education, the institution's recognition right here is the one that we talked about, the Higher Education Commission. Information on vocational documents as well. And also you'll see here that I said the other resource is an evaluation library and previous experience. One of the other things that becomes so important is for Jamie and her team in their years of experience to collect sort of an array of documents, to have a real idea of, we'll come back to that in a second, to have a real idea of what the documents should look like. So to keep scans of things that show what did the different periods of time show as far as documents. It's a great resource to go back and to be able to image it and say, yes, we are on a listserv that does this a lot, that says, hey, I have this document, and somebody will say, it looks just like what I have from that same time period. Very helpful to us. Now, we talked about the countries that were most popular. So the others, we talked about Pakistan through here, that's one. Brazil, India, the Philippines, and Egypt are your top 5 countries that FCCPT sees. With that, I am going to turn it over to you, Betsy.
Thank you, Julia. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the professional education review component of this. And there's people in the room thinking, okay, that's great, but I bet that Pakistani DPT is different than US DPT. Of course it is. Of course it is. And so this is now an opportunity to get into the details to let Arwa know what the differences were in her education to prepare for coming to work in the United States and ultimately pass the NPTE. So we have our exemplar of Pakistani education, and this session isn't about Pakistani education. We're using that as an exemplar, so please don't go away thinking I only know about one country, because the process can absolutely be generalized across. So the coursework tool, that's an important piece. We're on coursework tool number 6. And that evolves as the degree evolves across our profession, as CAPTE criteria evolves through our profession, and so we have coursework tool 6. That's available. Any of you can go see what the coursework tool is. You Google, I think Julia said, use your Google machine. Use your Google machine. If you don't have a Google machine, use a computer with Google on it, and you can search that. So it's very interesting. It's very interesting. And then authenticated transcripts and syllabi. And so that's the important authenticated document that is going to be submitted from the primary sources. And I don't know if you can see super well, but this is a PDF, kind of grainy looking, because it's probably a scanned document of a scanned document of a scanned document on a machine where the paper didn't get put in quite aligned. Okay, so it's not great copies sometimes, but as good as it can get. And so there's a lot of human work in this process to be able to look at that. And that's what this is illustrating right here. So this is the illustration of the professional education reviewer. So those are the 3 big parts then that are needed to make this next step happen. So let's talk about what that looks like. So this coursework tool is here, and we have general education components, communication and humanities, physical sciences, biological sciences, social behavioral sciences, and math. Okay, so general education information, and then professional education, so the PT stuff. So basic health science, medicine, medical science, exam, evaluation, plan of care and implementation, and related professional coursework. So that should be very familiar to any of you who are PTs or PTAs yourself. And on that note, we do this for PTAs as well. And then the clinical education component of the minimum clinical hours, and that needs to happen in a variety of diseases and conditions, and at least 2 different practice settings. So then we start, I say we in a very general term. This is the FSVPT staff, but today I'm going to become part of you. And so course 1 is anatomy number 1. And so we see the course description is analysis of the regional and systemic organization of the body. Emphasis is placed upon the structure and function of human movement. Comprehensive study of human anatomy with emphasis on nervous, musculoskeletal, and circulatory system is incorporated. Okay, sounds like a course that would probably work. Okay, then we see the detailed course outline. That's pretty good stuff. That seems like what an anatomy course might take. And then that's aligned back to the coursework tool. But we don't stop there. We look at the second anatomy course, and then that has detailed information more related to the neuro system. When applicant submits their materials or submits their application and we have the materials, it takes at least 2 hours per syllabus to find the right information and align it to the coursework tool, if in fact it does. And there are, it sounds like from Jamie, at least 3 or maybe an average of 3 institutions where those syllabi are coming from. So this is a lot of volume of paperwork to go through, and it's very accurate. So that's great because we have such highly skilled reviewers. So speaking of those highly skilled reviewers, here we are. And so that reviewer is going to have all of this information, and this is a screenshot from the coursework tool. So basic health science must include but not limited to 1 to 12 areas. The first one here, human anatomy. Credit hours, transcript reference, anatomy 1, 2, and number 4. And the justification is that the official transcript and course syllabi were the tool is used. Okay? And there's the highlight showing as such. And then here's the transcript. So we know already from what Juliet was talking about the grading scale and the name of the grade, and then the blacked out information is obviously the identifying information we're not sharing today. So this is a small snippet of 1 line of the coursework tool. And so from there, one after the other, and if a deficiency then is found, then that's part of what's reported back to the applicant so that they can remediate that to become compliant and be issued the healthcare worker certificate to be qualified to take the NPTE. So then the next part. So Arwa's dream was to become a physical therapist in the United States. And now she says it's at her fingertips because she successfully completed the credentialing process and is now authorized to take the NPTE. So we have a very happy ending to our story. So with that, we've given you lots of overviews. Are there questions? We're happy to answer them and have some dialogue. And although we might not have all of the answers, maybe somebody in the audience would be able to share their perspective. Of course, the evaluation is important. We'd like to hear your thoughts on how the session went. So we'll open it up to questions.
Hi, I'm Kathy Yarney from North Carolina. I've got 1,000 questions, so I'm going to try not to be a microphone hog. I'm just going to ask one right at a time. So within our office, there's one person that reviews the credentials reviews that comes in and signs off on them as being substantially equivalent because that's what our law requires. the one thing that you didn't happen to mention, and I don't know if you want to say more about this, is that in our state, you have to use Coursework Tool 6 for the exam because we abide by MPTE policies. But the coursework tools for endorsement could be, any one of the above, depending on the year of graduation. So where's the question in there? I think it's that because I'm the only person in the office that's currently looking at these, and I've had several conversations with Jamie about this, I'm also responsible for communicating what the deficiencies are to the applicant as far as North Carolina sees it. And it really isn't anything different than what the evaluation is that we get from you, but then that's where I kind of have the question. Our board has, by law, the ability to determine whether it's substantially equivalent and what people submit as meeting their deficiencies as doing that. And I don't know if everybody else has that ability. And I'm curious, now that I've watched this presentation and looking at the authentication of these documents and things like that, can anyone use these resources to authenticate documents or to determine if the documents look authentic for what they're submitting? I've seen some like original falling apart paper, and those are really more what I'm talking about, not so much a transcript from some U.S. university. So that's part of my question. Do you want to start with that?
Yes, thank you. Some of the resources are available for free. Others are not. Like the Edge is paid membership for that database. But some of like the ministries of education, the higher, those type of resources typically are free and public domain. And then, with your comment about how your board can look at documents to see if they meet the I'm not sure if there's any other jurisdiction that does that. If there is, I'm not aware of it. And I would caution you. Exactly. Many jurisdictions require the applicant to come back through us and submit that additional documentation, whether it's additional support from their school or additional courses for us to evaluate, making sure we're going through this rigorous authentication process. And then put it on the included in their evaluation, and then send it back to the jurisdiction. And hopefully at that time, they're equivalent, that they followed what they needed to do in order to get that equivalency. And then the jurisdiction actually has a report that says that the applicant is equivalent.
And I'm going to add just a little bit more to the resources. Yes, most of these can be found online, but making sure you're at the right one. There's a lot of places out there that say they verify things or that they're, will verify test scores. You need to make sure you're getting the primary source one rather than another one that India has all kinds of examination board verifications, but they're not exactly the exam board that you need. And Edge is not member, but it's a subscription. As a member, you get a break on that, but I think we could work with all of you as sort of government organizations, which is really quite a deal to get that. But yes, there are sources in the United States, some paid, some not, but a lot of these sources are based in the country that we're looking at.
Hi, I'm Allison McIver. I'm the administrator for Washington State. And I've talked to a lot of applicants as well who they're like, oh my gosh, I have my evaluation. It was found deficient. What do I do? And could you kind of tell us a little bit about like what happens when a deficiency is found with a licensee?
Great question, thank you. We do offer a service, our plan service, that applicants can request, and we will pair them with an advisor that will review their specific evaluation and give them recommendations of courses that they can take to meet their deficiencies. We partner with a handful of universities in the United States. The majority of them are the transitional DPT programs that our applicants are taking, and we list these on, we ask permission from the school. We work directly with the school so that, we know that we're allowed to provide this information to our applicants. But then it is up to the applicant to contact that school and to get admissions and to decide what course they want to take, because oftentimes we have 4 or 5 different options for one deficient, area. In those options, we have hybrid options, we have online options, we also have in-person options. So, we really try to have a variety of delivery methods so that, our applicants can really choose what's best for them. But that I would recommend them coming back through this particular program so that they know, for sure what they need to do. Because once they pick the courses, then we pre-approve it, right? So we make sure that what they pick really does meet their deficiency so that they're not doing anything, taking a course that isn't going to meet what they need. So it's a guarantee if they go through that process that, as long as they follow the plan, right? There are some applicants who they'll come through and just, they won't follow the plan that they were given and they ended up not being equivalent.
Hi, this is Tony Dominich from Austin. And in reflection to once we see the deficiencies from a state applicant in the state of Texas, we noticed that it was dependent on the coursework tool that they were evaluated and assessed on. And we felt like that was a barrier because the current coursework tool is a little bit more lenient than the older coursework tools in some respects, as far as for Texas, as far as the number of courses in physics you have to take and the courses of chemistry you have to take. And that's where we were seeing a lot. And so we were having these applicants, apply for an exemption to this deficiency sometimes. So we're looking at our rules because we want to not be a barrier with respect to that, and we really do rather than be assessed by the most current coursework tool. And so I think that's where we're going. You said you guys don't own the coursework tool. Who owns the coursework tool?
The Federation, FCCPT.
They created it?
Correct.
Oh, okay.
They created and validated it against the CAPTE criteria.
Okay, perfect.
I would say they had an outside company do that validation. They created the tool, this outside company validated it against the criteria.
Hi, I am Taj Franklin from APTA State Affairs. I'll be honest, I have so many questions for you all, and we're probably going to have a sidebar after this. However, I've heard some serious, heart-wrenching, gut-tearing stories from a couple of CAPTE, non-CAPTE educated PTs. And I was just wondering, of course, the answer is always refer them to the board, the state board that they're going to need to speak with. But are there any resources for them before they get there?
Before they get to the board, the Federation does have some resources on their website regarding foreign educated. They have, pathways that they can take, and then they do, it's a wizard. It's a foreign educated wizard, and depending on their answers, it gives them some resources that they can, look at prior to starting this process. I would also recommend it's very important that they know where they want to work. I mean, every state is different.
Yeah.
Every state is different. So they need to figure out where they want to work and then get on that state's licensure website and look at the rules, and figure out, because, as Kathy says, in her state, initial licensure requires one coursework tool, while endorsement requires another.
Yeah.
You go to, Texas requires the coursework tool, when you graduated, so it's very different. And I think that would be a good starting point for them.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Hello, Paul Klaponos from here in Florida, and I know you deal with us a lot. I've been on the board coming on 3 years, and I guess what I'm seeing, my personal perspective, there'll be foreign trained therapists that were certified and licensed in other states and other jurisdictions, and then want to come to us, and our law says that they have to be reevaluated. And they get indignant to find out that because they could practice in another state the way the coursework tool was at the time, they get reevaluated and they have a deficiency and they don't understand. And so then they don't listen to the board staff, and they insist our law allows them to then become before the board because, oh, well, the PTs are going to help me out because the board staff doesn't understand. And we have to tell them no. And, oh, by the way, this has been going on for 6 months, and you could have gone and CLEPT this course. But you're just, and so then there's the cultural differences, maybe getting a little bit indignant because they're not used to, like you said, it's a national thing, and they still don't get the individual states thing. But I lost my train of thought, and that happens to us old guys. They could have gone and CLEPT the course, but now what you're sharing with us is that you offer assistance in helping them find pre-approved stuff. And the feedback we get all the time, and maybe again in cultural differences, they say they can never get back in touch with you folks. And I'm sorry to tell you that, but that's the feedback we get.
Okay, no, that's good to know. And we do have phones and emails, websites, but we are a small staff, and sometimes we do get bombarded. We get probably over 100 emails a day, minimum. Right. So we do try to answer emails as quick as we can, but we do appreciate that feedback. And you're right. I've had this conversation before. When you're foreign educated, you're always a foreign educated in this country. Whether you've worked 20 years unencumbered, it's impossible, or it's very difficult for you to move from state to state because of the different rules and regulations. And it's challenging and it's heartbreaking for us when you have somebody who's worked in this country for 20 years and they're not equivalent and they just have to take physics. It's really hard for us to give them that information. We don't like it, but the way the rules and regulations are in the States, that's why I encourage you to look at those rules and regulations. Are there barriers that you're putting up that you didn't even know you were putting up? Why not change your language where, if they're equivalent on a higher level coursework tool, that's acceptable. Don't make them do this lower level where they may not be equivalent because it may have different gen ed requirements. So that's what I would recommend, is going back to look at your statutes and rules and see what you can do to reduce some of those barriers.
So I just have a point of curiosity. I think I heard somebody say that sometimes the barrier can be clinical education hours. And these may be people who have been in practice for a period of time, maybe not here, but how do they remediate clinical education hours?
That is our biggest challenge, is the remediation of clinical education. We do have one program that we work with in the US that will provide a clinical internship for our applicants. As you can imagine, that is not enough. We are able to accept work experience. This is a change that the Federation made a few years ago. So if the individual meets those requirements, it's very specific requirements. It has to be within, the work experience has to be within 3 years of their application. It has to be a certain number of hours. So as long as they meet that, we can give them up to 300 hours of Clin Ed, which is helpful, but sometimes it's still not enough. Some of the other options is going back to their home country, you know, going back to their school to see if they can do an externship, which some countries, you know, Brazil, you can do that. It's very open. India, it's just not possible. They have a lockstep program and you can't come in and, you know, do clinicals. So that is a very big challenge for applicants. And moving from Coursework Tool 5 to 6, it went from 800 hours to 1,050. You know, so that is a challenge. In India, a lot of the hours, it's 1,040. So oftentimes they're missing 10 hours. So that's a good question as a challenge.
So I have 2 questions, and they're kind of combined, so maybe you can answer them. So in order to apply to come to America, you know, to get licensed in America, does the clinician have to have a visa first, or do they apply for the visa after they've been approved in a state somewhere and passed the NPT?
It could be both. Like we can do an evaluation with somebody who doesn't have a visa.
Oh, okay. And then the compact, does that affect, like if they're approved in a compact state, so then they can practice?
Right, the compact works just like it does for domestic, for foreign educated, as long as that foreign educated has a home license, right? And that license is, they do have to have a driver's license too. They have to have a driver's license, they have to have a home license, a home state, and then they have to be in a state that is participating in the compact, and then they are able to get the privileges just like any other domestic, you know, trained PT. Now, you know, the interesting thing is with the compact, you know, you can be in a home state, work in a compact state, but if you try to move to that compact state, oftentimes they can't get licensed. Or it makes it, or it's a long process to get licensed. So, you know, what is your jurisdiction? What kind of message, you know, are we given foreign educated? So again, I go back to your statutes, your regulations, look at that, see what kind of barriers. You know, the Federation is here to, you know, we have people that are really good at that and can help you.
Rugi Canizares, foreign trained therapist, Oregon. And just some snippets, and then I do have a comment, I would like to get a comment from you, your expertise. But piggybacking from your comments, for example, I got a license from Connecticut, that was my initial licensure, to Oregon in 1992. At that time, there were no barriers. And sometimes administrative rules are living documents, they change. Sometimes they have good intentions, but there were consequences. Had I applied a year ago in Oregon, there were barriers. I would not have licensed through endorsement, even with my years of experience. So fortunately, Oregon recognized that. I was actually the chair of the Rules Advisory Committees. It has now changed. But for example, in Oregon, I could have gone in through the compact, through Washington, but I would have more barriers through endorsement, the old rule. That has now changed. So there's a lot of dynamics that can happen. And again, administrative rules, and this is why I'm doing a pitch with the Model Practice Act, right? Because that's what we looked at. It's like, this is the bar. Why are we giving more barriers with peers who had continued to develop in the profession, right? So that's just how the dynamics works, and you know, credit to Oregon, they reviewed it, they saw it as a barrier. How can we make it equitable for endorsement candidates? But yeah, that's a perfect example. It would have been quicker today for me to go through the compact as long as I keep Washington as a home state. Okay. But I do have a question for you all because this is under context. This dates me now. I was a foreign trained therapist back in the 80s where everything was paper. And I can tell you there is corruption at that time in terms of getting a transcript. And so do you have a sense of whether or not that is still possibly existing in terms of the source countries where there are universities that are not created equal, and even on prestigious universities, you're smiling, prestigious universities, believe me, I have had peers where in which, you know, corruption is very pervasive in some of these countries. Do you have a running list? How do you mitigate that part of the credentialing? Thank you.
We're always concerned, no matter what country. There are certain countries that we know are, more likely to have fraud, and those countries we sometimes will implement, certain or additional verification. For instance, Nigeria, sometimes, for a period of time, every Nigerian, transcript we got, whether it was from primary source, whether it looked like it always has, we sent it back for verification. No questions asked, because there was a period where fraud was great. So we do try to stay up on that by going to professional conferences, and to learn, where the concerning areas are. But overall, we're diligent on a daily basis, right? Every document we get, we go through a thorough process.
Can I just add a little bit more to that too? This is, we could spend, again, a week on fraud and talking about fraud in the international context. Now, of course, we have fraud here in the United States too, right? So just speaking about the international context, and because I started in this field and in this profession when I was 7, back in the day, I think about China. China's a huge country for sending, right? Number one, it just got eclipsed now by India. Did you know that? Now India has surpassed China in the number of international students. But back 20 years ago, for China, everything was suspicious, and you were constantly writing to institutions to try and get verifications. And, we go in and we talk about China was one of the biggest problems, and, was the authenticity was always up in the air. And since then, China has put in place a verification system that has been evolving, and now it's just standard practice. In fact, one group that we worked a lot with said, we can't have the applicants go get this verifications. They're going to be expensive. It's going to take time. And we said, we really don't think you're going to have any backlash. This is what institutions are turning to over and over again. It's actually very well laid out, very minimal cost, and guess what? They put it into place. We haven't heard a peep. It's just automatic. So things change, right, in that fraud world. And back, when you were getting educated, heck, I remember the Soviet era. Did I say 7? 5. I started when I was 5. Anyhow, it used to be you could smell the paper. And that's how you knew, this is definitely Soviet. And you knew, because it was so state-controlled, that anything you got from there, anything you saw, was recognized, because nothing could exist that wasn't. So that completely went out the window when the whole Soviet system fell. So this fraud is something that has been an ever-continuing thing that we're trying to stay in front of, just that far in front, because as soon as we get in front of it, guess what? They come back and they figure out how to try and
They're smart, right?
Yeah.
They're smart, and with AI, it's worrisome.
Right.
We just have to be diligent.
So, due diligence.
Hi. So we're trying to limit the barriers in West Virginia for foreign educated to come work in our state. And so there are a few schools in India that we're getting applicants who are saying, I see that you will waive for Canada, Australia, UK, English-speaking foreign countries. But they're saying that their courses were also taught in English, even though it's in India. And so we're having them, we don't know any other way to do this other than they're having their school program send in a letter in English stating that the program was taught in English. Is there an easier or safer way for us to do this? We don't want to put more barriers, but we do want to make sure that we're, waiving it the correct way.
That's a difficult one. I think the way you're doing it, if you're choosing to do it, is probably the only way. But I do caution you with language of instruction. It's not always what it seems. So I'll just leave it at that. It's, they could say that it's all taught in English, but are the books, it's not something that we use as a credential evaluation company to determine, language proficiency. We don't accept language of instruction being in English as a way to, waive the TOEFL.
And I'm going to make one more comment on that, only because, I get it. We do want to reduce barriers, but if that person isn't able to be successful in English, the barrier is going to come up later. So we're doing our best to make sure that the applicants that come in can succeed. And if that English isn't there, then that success is going to be a lot more challenging.
I just know, we'll have them call in and we can clearly hear that they're very proficient. They're, and so we want to, that's not really, or people wait to say, oh yes, you sound fine. Like that's not verifiable. So would you, so that's why we're okay. We spoke with them, we have the letter clearly, like this is fine. They've been in the States for however long. Do you have an alternative that you would maybe suggest? Is there anything else that you would think we could do, especially with endorsement applicants who've never taken the TOEFL and they're like, we're endorsement, we've been here for 20 years. Is there any other way that we can verify to not put another obstacle, but also be fair and make sure that we're doing it correctly?
If it's an individual that's been working for many years in this country, I think you could go to their employer, and get some type of verification of their English skills. And I think that would be a little more, recent, right? Than if this person's been here for 20 years, they were educated a long time ago, and it might be very difficult for them to get that kind of letter. So I would recommend maybe looking at where they're working and, talking to their supervisor. And even, your interview, maybe that's a standard process as well, in addition, to some of this other stuff.
This is Tony again, in reference to what we just discussed in this issue of English, mastering the English language, or at least being proficient in it. We had a situation where someone claimed again that they had all their education done from another country, and then they entered into a graduate program here in the United States, and they provided the transcript and everything was withdrawn, failed, and D. And I'm thinking, well, that's not supportive of mastering the English language, because we do look at education sometimes as support with the TOEFL scores, because every once in a while we'll have somebody that doesn't do well maybe in one or two of the areas of the TOEFL, and they're asking for an exemption, and it could be because they have worked many years already in the United States and they're coming in through endorsement, or they have attained an education to a degree, a transitional DPT or something of that sort. And there's various English-speaking countries that we've recognized too. If you did a PhD in one of those countries and it was all in English, then that supports a little bit stronger, perhaps giving them that waiver or that endorsement, because we do require the TOEFL. But we're kind of in the discussion for those that are coming through endorsement, whether we should do the TOEFL or not, and maybe just use the TOEFL for those that are coming in through exam. So that's a discussion we're having in Texas. So anyways, there's other, like you said, there's other ways to try to support that.
We do also recognize, if a person has a degree from the U.S., then for our process, the TOEFL is exempt. And there's other countries like Canada, except Quebec, Australia, New Zealand, the countries where the official language, native language is English, then we do have some of those exemptions. We have about 5 minutes.
Oh, this will be quick, just to piggyback about English, because I spoke English as far as I can remember. And actually my first boss is Mike Parisi. He's somewhere around here. He's the delegate from Connecticut, right? I bet you won't remember, but the first year of working in the US, I was under remediation, not because of my skill and competence. I was not effective communicating in healthcare. And I think that's what the regulators are trying to do. But English, in my journey of being a foreign trained therapist, has strong cultural connotations. We spoke English in the Philippines very fluently during my time. Did not mean I was an effective caregiver in English in the US. And that's why I appreciate given the chance to learn and be coached. And so I think having a standardized test like the TOEFL takes the heat off a lot of variance in being an effective healthcare giver in English. Even today, as I speak to you in public and I'm very comfortable, I would misstep sometimes because there are some regional differences, right? And then that's just, it's all natural to us because I've been here now forever, right? But again, just think that in mind, and I would recommend just standardizing it because it's really hard to capture, right? Thank you.
Early on in the presentation, you mentioned that you validate the TOEFL for 9 states. And can any state ask that happen if an applicant is getting their educational credentials done through FCCPT?
They can. I will, caution you that we only have one service for that, and it's the Type 1. And so not only do we verify TOEFL, we will verify any international licenses as well. And it is a little more expensive than our educational credential review service just for licensure because we are verifying these other 2 items within the process.
Okay.
But yeah, that's something that you can certainly let us know, and we will then inform our applicants if they're seeking licensure in North Carolina, they have to apply for a Type 1 service.
Yeah, and we don't require that by law, so I don't know that I could really do that. But to Rugi's point, we took a stand a couple of years ago because I was being asked to verify these letters from schools that it was completed in English, and then other things that I felt I had no ability to make that decision, and it's how can I know? And so we went to just TOEFL, FSBPT 2017 or whenever it was, standards that FSBPT set, and oh my gosh, the pushback, the feedback. But the point is, what we are trying to do is help people communicate with their patients in English effectively. And it's the hill we've chosen to die on, but we're also being accused of barrier. We put up a huge barrier. So I don't know what the answers are, but I feel like if our role is public protection, that's what we're supposed to be doing.
All right, well, thanks everybody. We are out of time. Do not forget to get the QR code, do the evaluation. If you have any further questions, we will be around the rest of the conference. Thank you.